Keirsey.
Hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the Simply Human YouTube channel and podcast with me, Christina Caro, clinical psychologist, and my partner, Karen Lee Linsky, self-trust and executive coach. Good morning, Karen.
Hey, Christina. Oh, I'm so
I'm-
excited. Number 3 on this series.
Yes, today we're going to be continuing our series on cognitive processing preferences that's based on Carl Jung's theory of personality types. And just to recap, in case you didn't catch the introversion extroverted episode or the first episode of this series, we are talking about how we orient towards information. So, how we're perceiving, how do we gather that data, and how do we then organize that data and make decisions about it? Because those two processes actually influence many aspects of how we present in the world are our personality types. It's not everything that makes up a person's personality. There's innate temperament, there's nature, there's nurture, there's a lot of different things. But these two aspects of cognitive processing, how we orient what we're going to be drawn to in terms of information, our biases towards information, and how we organize and make decisions, does affect our personality. And so this is the third of 8 because we are going over the 4 perceiving functions and the 4 decision-making functions. And if you want to learn more about this, or if you're a professional in human resources who'd like to go a lot deeper, I would really recommend a training by a company called Personality Hacker. They actually train at the level that we're talking about in these episodes. It's different from if you were to go and do training with, say, the Myers-Briggs, which is the main tool that is used to identify people's preferences. This Personality Hacker, I just find their material to be the most accurate and in-depth.
And I think the key thing about this to remember is what we've always said with our podcast. It's really to take it a little bit deeper than what we typically know. And so what I love when we chose this topic was because I always thought Myers-Briggs, and I thought, okay, I'm an ENFP, right? And I kept thinking, okay, I thought them as individual, right? And I think that's the beauty of this is we're trying to teach you more about going deeper, because it's amazing how much I've learned so much when we went deeper into these specific types.
And what Karen is referring to is if you took this Myers-Briggs assessment, you were giving a code that had 4 letters,
Exactly.
E and an I.
And
For
you go
extroversion,
individual, like
introversion.
you don't even think the connection. That was the problem,
Yeah.
right? You think
A
individual.
sensing or intuiting, which is perceiving, a thinking, feeling, decision making, and then this JP, which they don't always explain very well. And it's just really incredibly inaccurate. And so we are just focusing on the Carl Jung theory on personality type and cognitive functions, where there's actually 4 ways of processing and 4 ways of decision making, giving you 8 function type.
And so before we start, though, we'd like for you to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, share, and hit the notification button, because as you know, you will then know when our new episodes are posted, especially for this series. Now, for those who are on podcast, please hit the text us link with your comments and questions. So let's get into the meat of it for today's session.
Okay, before we go into what we're talking about today, which is the cognitive perceiving process of intuition in the extroverted attitude or the extroverted direction, let me just remind you real quickly, if you didn't watch the introversion extroverted episode, what Carl Jung was talking about when he talked about introversion and extroversion is about the direction of psychological energy. Is it outward toward the world of people, objects, and things? Or is it inward towards the world of ideas, impressions, feelings, and internal world? Each of those is not its own thing. So when a person says, I'm introverted, I always think, well, introverting what? Because they aren't standalone. They are associated with a cognitive process. You either introvert your perceiving, or you introvert your judging, or extrovert your perceiving, or extrovert your judging. And we all do both. We are going to introvert one process, and then we're going to extrovert the other. So there's this dynamic balance. In this episode, we are focused on a data collection, a perceiving function, and an extroverted one at its outward focus, defined by intuition. Now, we've done the sensing, 2 episodes on sensing, where the emphasis was on the 5 senses: what you could touch, what you could smell, what you could see, what you can hear. And it was either the here and now concrete data, extroverted sensing, or it was the introverted impression of that data, my memory in the past of that data. Now we're moving into the intuitive function, which is beyond the 5 senses. We're moving into what some people call the 6th sense, but it is not dependent upon the concrete data. So this function, extroverted intuiting, it's sort of titled like rapid innovation, because that's basically gives you a general sense of what this is about. And for you boomers or Gen Xers, you may remember the TV show MacGyver. MacGyver was an example of extroverted intuiting. He would start with a thing, a ballpoint pen and a roll of duct tape, but then it became something else beyond that, a possibility. And then we found out recently, I had Karen take the assessment, and Karen's dominant function is extroverted intuition. So today we get to have Karen tell us more about herself. And her type is extroverted intuition combined with an introverted feeling decision-making process.
And who would have thought that I would actually be an I somewhere? So let's go ahead.
So Karen is actually not only an extroverted intuitive perceiving type, but that's her dominant function that she combines with the introverted feeling. The other dominant personality type is an ENTP. If you ever took the Myers-Briggs and you remember your code, it's ENTP. It's an extroverted intuition with an introverted thinking function. And then there's 2 more. There are people who have it as their secondary, their auxiliary, and that is the INTP and the INFP. Those are also extroverted intuiting types. It is just not their dominant, because their dominant function is their introverted thinking or the introverted feeling that we're going to go over in future episodes. So you have these 4 types if you took the Myers-Briggs, or again, we're going to put the link on where you can do a free assessment and then listen to this to validate it, because I don't want you to just take what gets spit out. It is self-report, prone to human error. I want you to go through the exercises we're going to do and then validate, yeah, this is how my brain works. Now, I want y'all to know only 19% of the population has this preference of extroverted intuiting.
So, Christina, just because some of them might not have heard the previous, when we say dominant versus auxiliary, can you explain a little bit the difference between those 2?
Oh, sure. That's a good point. So the way our brain develops, it continues to grow over time. So there are 8 functions total, and we will, over our lifespan, have access to more and more of these processing abilities. But when we're in our 20s to mid 30s, we're in the one that comes easiest for us. And this analogy that helps to understand is if you think about a car with 4 passengers, the dominant function is equivalent to the person in the driver's seat. It's the one who kind of knows how to do everything, knows where they're going, has the plan, get you from here to there. And then in the passenger seat is their co-pilot. Okay, that's the auxiliary function. But you can see there's a big difference between the passenger and the person driving. And then in the back seat, you have your third, your tertiary, and that's the teenager. If you think about the level of development of that function, that's going to be the teenager in the back seat. It's kind of paying attention, checked out a lot. Maybe they know where they're going. They're just really impatient, like, I'm going to stare out the window. And then you have your first of what's called the inferior functions, or the least developed. And that's like the toddler in the car seat. So we're talking today about extroverted intuition primarily in the driver's seat, and then some traits you will also see in the passenger seat, just not to the extent when you're in an auxiliary preference.
Perfect. Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Now let's just sort of go into the nitty gritty about what is intuition. So I explained a little bit that, like sensing, it does start with an object that's in the external world. So people, places, and things. But it quickly leaves what's here and now into the future. because we've talked about each of these preferences has an orientation in time. And the orientation in time for intuition and the extroverted attitude. Sorry, folks, I keep saying attitude because that is the term that Jung means. It's a nautical term that means direction. So when I say attitude, I don't mean like they have a bad attitude. That's not what I mean.
Directly about where they're focused at, right?
Yeah, it's synonymous with direction. So hopefully you're all going to pick that up so I can just use that term. So the extroverted intuitive is oriented present to near future, and it's the brainstorming function.
Which I love. Which makes sense.
It's actually what makes Karen so good at what she does.
So happy. Yeah.
So let's go back to the apple exercise. So if you remember, we have this exercise. And so if you watched before, hopefully grabbed your apples. If you don't, pause the video and then come back with your apple, or honestly, it could be any object that you want to use. And this time we're going to invite you to use your perceiving function to first observe. So here's coffee mug. So here I have an object, but I'm going to allow my mind to go beyond that it's a coffee mug into what else could it be, or what could I do with it that's different, that's unique, that might be an innovation. So actually, this is an inferior function for me. Like, do you want, I don't know if you have an object near you.
Well, it's funny because I have a coffee cup, but I had to choose a pure white coffee cup. That's not what I think is so funny. You usually have some. I was like, of course, the one day when you asked me, I have a pure white coffee cup.
Well, okay, but if you were going
to be creative, yeah.
Okay, so like, what are some things?
So it's very interesting because, and a lot of people do this already. Like a coffee cup can be used for so many different things. When you turn it upside down, you could use it and glue it onto something, and then you have like a pedestal or something to go higher, right? And also you could do the whole thing about the plants and using it to hold, the pens, all that other stuff. So it's not really used as a cup, right? What I also think is interesting too is I can even use it to help draw an ear.
Yeah.
So what? It's true, right? I can draw an ear. If I'm trying to draw a face, I could turn it on the side and draw a perfect shaped ear with this mug, because it's perfectly reminds me of my brother's big ears.
It could be. It could be
someone. Yeah.
Yeah, this is the language you hear with extroverted intuitive. It's not what it is as much as what it could be. Oh, this could be that. Oh, we could do this with that.
Yeah.
Awesome, Karen. So let me just go over quickly, like some of the things we see with the apple is exactly what Karen said. They're like, oh, I could juggle it. It could be a toy. Oh, I could cut it up and make a pie, and then I could give it to friends. I could take the seeds, and then I can plant the seeds, and then it'll grow more apples. And then those apples, this is usually ENFPs, is they're not only thinking about what to do with the apple, but how can it help other people. I could plant a tree, and then we have more apples, and I take it over to like our local food bank, and then more people could have and it's like rapid fire. Boom, 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 boom. When we do this as a group, so we do this exercise first at the individual level, so they kind of get into it. Now, some of you, especially if you are probably like an introverted sensing type, we're like, it's a cup. Well, I could have tea. You're going to be thinking into your past of, well, I can't see. You might have come up with a pencil holder because if you have a past experience,
exactly, that's the point,
then you would maybe come up with that.
Or plant holders, what people have done it before, because you've seen it before. You've seen it on Instagram, you've seen it on TikTok, right? Different things, exactly, yeah.
But this is also not my preference. And when this is like my fifth, and when Karen her very first thing was, I would turn it upside down. Okay, first of all, that I had it's so not where my brain goes. I turn it upside down. That concludes something on a pedestal. I have a pedestal so far from the object. That is such a great example of extroverted intuiting, So, and you see with the apple, we do it in a group, and with the group, we have a small gift bag that's usually got some pictures or something. And then in it are these markers, like colored markers that have a scent to it. And, with the extroverted sensates, they're usually, they have a pink pen. They will take the pink pen. They will write pink marker. And if the scent of what it is written on it, they'll write strawberry scented. If it's not written on it, they'll just say scented because they don't have the factual data. The introverted sensates will pick one pen and write a linear list of, well, it's markers children use or facilitator tools, marker. It'll be what they have seen it used for. But Karen's group, oh my goodness gracious. The pens are on the floor because the first thing they do is they empty it out, and now they're like putting the bag on their head and like, I can make a hat out of this. And oh, you take the pens and throw it in the bag and we'll make a toy out of it. And someone stacked the pens and like, it could be a sword. And someone else grabbed 3 pens and they're drawing a rainbow and like, we can use it to make rainbows. Like, it's just brainstorm, each person feeding off of the other person. And it's very playful. But is any information getting up on that chart? No. And we'll get to what the gifts and challenges are next.
I'm sure you guys can guess what the gifts and challenges are, but this is what we'll formally share with you what the gifts and challenges are. So I'm sure you've experienced us. I'm sure you've experienced us just like we've experienced the sensing. And I think this is what's great about this podcast, because you start to appreciate the other one more and realize also where you have to hold us back a little bit, right? Seriously, because I remember when I kept going with, oh, let's just use this, do the brainstorm. I'm realizing there's people who are really good at brainstorming, and yet I'm not teaching them how to behave towards the people who are the other ones, the sensing people, right? And so they're shutting down the sensing person, and I'm like, everybody share, but I'm an extra. So of course I love brainstorms. I'm like, oh, everybody can do it. I'm just really, So this is what's great about it, because then you start to realize the value of us knowing the other ones is because we have more grace for all the other ones and can be more intentional about how we engage the other ones that aren't like us. And whoever we are facilitating or as a leader or whatever, it's important for us to understand what our dominant is, right? So that I can make sure that I'm not overshadowing because of theirs. So,
and what she's talking about is your function, your preference, understanding what their preference is. So like, I'm someone, this is a different type of processing, but I'm a visual processor. I need that noun at the end. So for any of you who process like me, I may come in and say, okay, Karen means their preference so that you know what she's talking about. Some of you who are extrovert intuitives, you know exactly what she's talking about. Again, these are the difference in how we take in information. Karen's type is really good at making intuitive leaps. Like, this is one of the strengths, is they have insight about people, an issue, a concept without tangible information, because they're able to make the leap intuitively. They're like, oh, Karen is saying theirs, but we're talking about all this. She's talking about their function. I don't process that way. So I'm like, there what? Like I have to have a little bit more the tangible when we're talking about the present moment. I get intangible way off into the future, but when I'm closer in time, then I actually have to have more tangible. And that's just my preference. That's just my processing need. It's different. So like, this is another piece to understand when you're working in groups. Like, we all have these different needs. And it is very challenging to make sure we are hitting the need for everybody. Because what happens for people like Karen is when you have to like always spell this stuff out. I know for me, because I am a little bit more like Karen on big abstract ideas, that if you get all sensate on me and are giving me like linear every little detail, I start feeling like you think I'm stupid. Like, I can't make that leap. I'm like, why are you telling me all of it? It's obvious. I am guilty of not giving enough information as well, because it's like, well, it's obvious, so I don't say it. And then I have to, when I realize I'm with someone who's sensory, because they keep saying, what are you talking about? Like, what are you talking about? I'm like, oh shit. I think I'm not saying all the words.
I also think it makes sense too, because you guys, when we decide on a title, right? Christina wants to have an outline, and I just want to go with it because we got the topic. I know we can, because that's how we usually discuss things. And that's why we started the podcast, because we were talking about things and stuff. But she needed to have it. And so she would always do the outline, which I always felt guilty about. But she goes, "You'll be okay, because whenever I think, then I'll bring a connection in." So she was never
Yes.
worried about me because I could always figure out something to say. So it just
No, I knew Karen just needed the prompt and then her brain's going to run off. Me, I cannot do that. I am so this isn't one of the 4 drivers in the car for me, this function. This is the part that's in the trunk. Doesn't even know what's going on. Doesn't know what's going. So yeah. This is an in the trunk of the car function for me. So you'll see this dynamic with me and Karen, where sometimes I have to like double check to make sure I'm in the trunk. I can't see where you go.
So I think also what's interesting to me is I like complexity, right? And I'm very nonlinear. And I think that's what makes me good in my role when I deal with leaders, when I do leader coaching. I do a lot of leader coaching. And
Yes.
part of what they like is there's not a connection of dots all the time, because I see the connection. I make the connection. And that's one of the value gifts I give. And so that's what we mean by nothing's really complex. So I'm not scared, because I know I can make sense of something from it. And then people will go from there. And I'm starting to love my gift. I used to hate it in some ways, but now I love it in some ways. But then there's also the problem of just too much of the brainstorming. So let's talk about some of the other gifts that we were listing out so people can appreciate this.
Your type does thrive in brainstorming. You are the natural born brainstormers. Now, again, we're talking about the dominant type. The auxiliary types, it doesn't quite look like brainstorm. Remember, because they're dominant, is they want to organize the information. So sometimes brainstorm will be a little bit too fast, because they're dominant. The driver of the car is wanting to organize the data or trying to see how they feel about the data inside. And we talked about introverted processes are slower. So again, these gifts, I am a bit slanting towards those who have it as dominant. Extroverted intuitives are also really good with conceptual ideas over specific. It's like even fragments of ideas is enough to get them running. It doesn't have to be so specific, but they get you all get sparked by a new concept. And then it's like, oh, how do we do this? How do we flesh it out? So you are the types who tend to have more of those big, ambitious ideas over the pragmatics. And it makes you good then about inspiring people, because you see the potential. You are drawn towards the adventure of it. And your types tend to be, when it comes to ideas and new things where we're going and the new possibility, much more risk tolerant, because you do have an inherent optimism. Wouldn't you say about, we could do this, guys?
Yeah. And I think the interesting part too is while you're talking too, I think a lot about when I'm in leadership meetings, and I know I have to have I call it a detailed agenda, which is really a back pocket design, because I have to give it so that the sensing people have some concrete about how I plan to. And it's very interesting, because I use the word ask, tell, right, share story. And then for me, I don't even, this is the secret, so I hope some of my clients aren't listening to me. But then what happens is that I may end up not, or telling something else, doing it a different way, because of how I'm feeling the energy in the room, right? And I usually really use it as a back pocket design, so they know what I'm doing. I think that's the whole point of this is to appreciate the various gifts of the people that you're talking through, and making sure that you're more clear on your understanding. But I like the idea of now, because I love when I learn that when I write down what I'm doing, I now label it as a back pocket design, which helped me. Instead of exactly when I had to write one, I just get so pissed, because I'm like, I'm the professional, trust me. And I started to doubt they don't think I'm good enough, right? And then it fed my imposter syndrome and all that. But now, because of these that I've been working on it for so long, when I label it as a back pocket design for my need and then for their needs, it allows me to be my very best. There's so many gifts to this. And yes, we'll be talking a little bit about the challenges, but again, they're challenges, right? But they're not, there's always the gifts that we always have to remember to, but there's my optimism.
Yeah. And Karen and I used to have these conversations where she would be getting down, or the imposter syndrome. But since I understood this dynamic, I would say, Karen, you're in an introverted sensing environment, not comfortable with risk, wants it to be linear, doesn't see what isn't tangible, has to be linear. Prove it, show me, okay, tangible. And so it's hard as an intuitive because it feels like you are not believed, you're doubted, and that judgment is there. This is why I'm so passionate about this, because the judgment is there. Imagine if you're in a marriage and you have these differences. I had this couple, her intuition is my type, and so she's looking at the meaning and blah blah blah, and the husband was a sensei. He's like, I don't want to hear the word meaning again. Just, what do you want, and I will make it. I don't need to know the meaning of the colors. I don't need to this. I don't need to know that. And then she's hurt because she feels like their wedding is not going to be meaningful to him, and he's frustrated because he's like, it's gobbledygook. I love you. That's enough. And I want to build this thing that makes you happy. So why are you upset? But it's these differences that are just love, the communication of love. It's getting lost in translation because they're complementary, not compatible. They don't know it enough to have done the work to benefit from that complementary nature, where I can see, like, oh, I know how your brain works. I can now translate that into gestures of love instead of feeling I'm not seen or I'm not understood. But yeah, it's really hard work. So initially, but there's so much information out there for y'all. Like, again, we're going to put the book, I'm Not Crazy, I'm Just Not You, and personality types, a user's manual or owner's guide, because they are so good. If you suspect you're in a relationship and your partner is processing differently from you, you should invest in really trying to understand and having these conversations, because it'll help you understand needs. It'll help you understand why your partner does what they do and what frustrates them. Instead of it becoming conflict, it could just help deepen really the intimacy and connection and appreciation, because whatever they do well, you probably suck at. Because that's just how it works.
And trust, right? And I think the same thing. I mean, whenever you're talking about, I mean, she's talking about partner, but it's any relationship, right? Work relationship, when you're trying to figure out between you and your boss what's really going on. And when you go into the personality hack stuff and really understand the deeper level of those 8 that Christina's describing and we're describing in these podcasts, if you explore some more, it's very interesting because it gives you the ability to understand it so that the conflict is no longer a conflict, right? Because you're able to see it in different eyes. And that's the whole point. I remember my husband always said, and I bring this up a lot, where, Karen, I'm sorry to tell you, the world does not revolve around you. So my perception, right, of how it should be, the world where everybody will love brainstorm, is like, that reminds me, the world does not revolve around the way I think, right? We all have complementary things. So are there some
and actually, Karen, you're describing the manifestation of introverted feeling. And we'll get into that, because introverted feeling types are the most prone to thinking everyone else thinks exactly the way I do. Like, I'm an extroverted feeling. Yeah, I'm an extroverted feeling type. I'm like, and I know my introverted intuition is less than 2% of the population. So I'm like, yeah, no one, no.
Oh, well, at least I'm 17. You're only 2. No, just joking.
No. You're only 8%. I added up all 4 of the extroverted intuitive to get to that. Yeah, your type, sort of the distribution is only about 8%. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about the challenges now. Most of you are probably encountering this more than anything else. Intuitives and the extroverted attitude love that brainstorming, but will tend to lose energy after the initial idea burst, because where they get their dopamine hit is the idea of things. When you start getting to implementation, making that idea manifest in the external world, that's an extroverted judging function that they've gone on. They're now the next thing to brainstorm, next idea.
We tend to procrastinate.
You procrastinate. It'll look like procrastinating. The reason it looks like procrastinating, because you're losing the energy when you're shifting now to those sensory details, the pragmatics, the how do I bring it to closure in the external world. We're now going into the extroverted intuitives trunk of the car, backseat of the car. So there's just not the interest and not the energy anymore. So they do tend to ignore the pragmatic reality. So they have these big ideas. And if you're on a team and you're trying to, or you're in a marriage and you're talking about, okay, how do we make this vacation happen? How do we make this, technology change happen? Your extrovert and intuitive who came up with the big idea, like, where are they? Where'd they go? So they're not that great on when they get to the pragmatic details of it. They could get easily bored by the status quo and routine because they do seek novelty. And because they're going from idea to idea, they may not be even paying attention to the consequences. And if you're in a leadership position, this is why this is really important. And let me give you an example. I work for an ENFP, just like you, director, and small staff. And so she's always coming up with the new idea. I mean, I appreciated her innovation and her vision. New idea, new idea, new idea. But each one's landing in the laps of staff. And our plate is getting more and more full. And she doesn't think about what the consequences it was having on staff that was starting to feel completely overwhelmed. They weren't clear what the priorities were because each idea sounds like the most important idea of the moment. And so, okay, now I guess I'm supposed to switch over here and do this now. Oh, now idea this one. Oh, I guess I'm supposed to drop and switch over this now. And so nothing is getting done. The plates are getting full. Staff is getting overwhelmed. And there's just a lot of distress. And there's just a complete lack of awareness that these ideas, which are good ideas, there's consequences to not reining it in, to not checking it in. So if you're in a relationship, you're the idea person, the partner may feel like, I always have the hard part of the logistics, of the planning. I'm always the one who has the plan. I'm always the one who's making all the decisions. And you're off having fun and doing the next adventure, and I'm left with the consequences. Like the kids, they're now didn't get enough rest, and now I have to deal with the cranky kids' consequences. And so tons of resentment builds up with this particular shortcoming not being recognized as just an artifact of over focus on the strengths of it and not mindfulness around the challenges so that could be mitigated. Does that resonate at all?
I mean, it resonates a lot as to if I'm purely this, but as we all know, we're not purely one all the time because I can get, so this is not saying you're always off and you can't. So when it's the idea of pairing with that other person, or for
Yeah,
example,
yeah.
with your leader, it's the ability to know that's the way you typically are. And that's why you have a leadership team. I mean, the idea is before you make the decision that we should do this, you would talk to other people before you make a decision, right? And I think, and it's important to make the priorities and things like that. And I think you tend to learn more about yourself. That's why we're bringing this up, because there's that pureness of, if you had your way, you could only be you, this is what you'd want to always do. Like, this is your happy place, right? To do this. But because you live in this world too, you know that you have to get certain things done. And the idea is that you still have to create that project plan, which always I hated. So I always get someone to help me create that project plan of details. Then they would add more things because that's things that I would not remember. And so I'd always go. And I think that's the value of us, is realizing who you are truly, like what your gifts are, and then also getting other people to help. Because I know
Where
one thing
you, yes,
yeah.
where you
And
have
I,
a blind spot, get
yeah.
support.
And so I also think about one of the issues I have is follow through, right? And so one person said to me is what she does now, and which I am doing and still need to work on though, is to do immediately. Like whatever the action is, if I can do it immediately, then I do it immediately. Right. So if I need to send someone a file, I send it right after the call or during the call if I can, because otherwise I'm going to forget, right? Because I'm moving on to the next thing. Or, I'm making promises. How many times have I made Christina a promise and I just got distracted and didn't do it? But the whole point of it is it's important that you start to understand that, and you find what will help you manage it. And I think that sometimes a coach is good, your therapist is good, your friends are good that you know it that way. And I think that shows the importance of community, right? That we all need each other. We can't, survive on an island. We all need each other. Because I could see what you're just talking about, the people who that here's a great idea, so they implement it, right? Because they think it's a great idea, so they say, oh, people love it. But that's where you have to have that dialogue with other people to check in to make sure. And that's why so much conversation is important.
Yeah,
Does
and
that make sense what I'm
okay,
saying?
so here's a great example. Karen and I must have been talking about we should do this in a YouTube channel for what, a year and a half. We would have these great conversations and be like, oh, this would make such a good podcast. And neither of us are like, we're both actually dominant perceiving types, but ultimately I do extrovert in the judging aspect, implementation in the external world. So finally I said, okay, we got to just do it. So I set everything up, got the channel, set it all up. I'm like, okay, let's just do it. Input. So Karen, I wouldn't have done it on my own because that brainstormy part is just not my strength. But Karen hearing the possibility and saying over and over, we should do this, we should do this, we should do this. And me being the implementer, okay, here's how we do it, da 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 da. And it becomes a really good collaborative partnership. Idea person, implementer, idea person. I'm blank slate. Karen's like, da 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 da. But then it doesn't happen because then I come in and I implement and I can make it happen. But then what happens, Karen, you keep saying to me, I feel guilty. I feel guilty. And I'm just like, to me, it's the creative aspect of it. I'm creating something in the external world. So that gives me juice. And I know that doesn't give her juice. The brainstorming part, the idea part, what are we going to talk about next time? I'm like, I don't know. Like, I'm so blank. I don't know. I don't know. So I told her, I said, Karen, I don't feel guilty that I don't have any ideas of what to do. That doesn't make me feel guilty that you like come up with the ideas and seeing the possibility. I said, I'm not guilty that I don't do that. It's just, that's hard for me. That's in the back trunk. So why are you feeling guilty that I'm implementing? That's in your back trunk of the car. It doesn't make sense to feel guilty. But what Karen has to deal with is she's still in the corporate world and there's consequences and there's external expectations, and that can build this sense of guilt. So understanding, okay, I'm going to have to pull on this part that's not strong. So how do I get the support I need? And so her type, these extroverted intuitives, one of their gifts is also collaboration, which is good because then it's like, I've talked to Karen about this. I'm like, you just need to collaborate. You just need to, hey, if you're stuck working on something for a team meeting, call me, call me. I'll brainstorm with you. And then she get her brain, I see her brain get all lit up and she's like, okay, I'm good. I'm going to go do it right now.
Yeah. And it's even funny because I think sometimes when Christina, like, I think, okay, it's really funny because I think I told you this, and my one friend Kim does this with me. But let's just get on the phone together and we
Yes.
collaborate. So then whenever I have a question or something, then I can ask her, okay, do you have a minute? I got to ask it, right?
Yeah.
But I also think what's really cool too is because sometimes I don't even need you. It's like I think I should call Christina, but you're busy because you're therapy, you have a client. And then I say, oh my gosh, this is what she would say. And then I feel like, okay. It's like the funniest thing sometimes because sometimes I don't let the physically talk about you, right? And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, this is what she'd say. So it's very interesting for me too. It's just even the sense of like wanting to collaborate, and then just because we've spent so much time together too, I could hear something, right? This is just a little bit, and then I'm just doing it, right? So it's just interesting too for me
That's
that
an
nuance.
intuitive trait. So the intuitive trait, we can
Oh,
actually
see?
we can operate, both of us, introverted intuitives, extroverted intuitives. We can actually manifest out of the idea of something. So the
Isn't that
idea,
cool?
Christina, is, whereas the introverted sensei, the extroverted sensei, it's like, well, I need to talk to you. I need to
Yeah.
see you. I need to hear you. I could just imagine you. Like, I just use my imagination. That is an intuitive trait. Either way, that is, I think, a really special trait. So let me just summarize now, because these are gonna be a little longer because when we get into the function types that each of us actually have, you have this
It's too
opportunity to hear
exciting.
firsthand. Yeah. So there are certain careers that are where you will thrive. So it's important to know that these processing preferences, you're going to get more of your brain let up, more dopamine, which is the reward chemical that makes you feel motivated is going to happen when you're able to spend like 80% of your day operating at your strength versus 80% of your day operating from the back trunk of a car. That's exhausting. You don't know where you're going. It's just exhausting. So understand this. And there are careers like what Karen is, a facilitator. I hate facilitating. Not even talking about it makes me have EBGBs. Facilitating, teaching, engineering. So the thinking types who see the possibilities. And like my dad is an aerospace engineer, and every project he did was a first. First time mapping the earth in 10 days, first time going to Venus, first time, exploring all this first.
Yeah.
Entrepreneurship. If you have the right team, so you have your implementer, the entrepreneur is the one who has the ideas and the energy to bring the idea into the world. Exploratory sciences, where you're cutting edge, nanotechnology. Different, you could see counseling. I'd say counseling because it's emerging in the moment. You're dealing with whatever's in the room and emerging in the moment and
making connections, counseling, coaching.
Yeah. Coaching, in terms of both professional coaching, but even if you are, say, coming in as a coach to a team that hasn't been doing very well, like the football team that hasn't been doing well, but you see the potential and you see what needs to happen. And then you have your assistant coaches who can figure out the pragmatic drills to get you from A to Z. So it's a variety of careers, but what you're thinking about is what allows me to be in the space of possibilities. That's what your creativity, possibilities, innovation in the moment at looking what is into what it could be. That's what you want to be looking for. So, we're hoping that this is a bit of a taste. This is just a taste. I mean, we're covering this in such a small amount of time. But it's a taste. We're giving you the resources to delve in more. We're inviting you to send us questions because if you're a parent, you want to understand the diversity of your children. You might be different from your child, and you want to understand how to help them thrive and how to learn about themselves. And like Karen said, you could be on a team. So we want to just give you that taste so you know that neurodiversity is a thing to be thinking about. Challenge the judgments that you've formed over these years that they're crazy because they're not like me. And take some time to explore more and more depth so that you have this understanding. And not only can you find your own life to be more fulfilling, but it improves the relationships and the people that you're with.
Yeah. And just a reminder of where to find the more resources are in the show notes, right? So again, we are just so excited to bring this to you because again, it's beyond just the surface definition. And that's what's exciting for us because this awareness began to help us. Like I kind of wish I had this back when I was, going to college and deciding on what careers. If I had known that earlier, it would be a lot easier for my life. But the whole point of it is don't forget to subscribe because that would help us out and make sure that we're able to share this with more and more people, which is what we want to do. Leave a review, share your comments below. So until next time, thank you, everybody. See ya.
Bye, everybody.